Chapter 9. The maximum security prison sat like a scar on the landscape 3 miles from the pack house, its reinforced walls and silver-lined cells designed to contain the most dangerous supernatural criminals. Kira stood at her office window, watching the daily procession of visitors making their way up the winding path to its gates. Too many visitors, all heading to see the same prisoner. He's had 12 different wolves visit him this week, Dominic said from behind her desk, scrolling through the security reports. All claiming to be family friends offering comfort during his difficult time. Kira turned from the window, her expression troubled. 12 disciples spreading his poison to anyone willing to listen. The guards report that his conversations always center around the corruption of pack traditions and the dangerous precedent of female leadership. Dominic set down the tablet with more force than necessary. He's building a mythology around himself. 3 months had passed since their mating ceremony and Garrett's final failed assault. 3 months of rebuilding, reforming, and establishing their joint rule. By every measurable standard, they had succeeded beyond expectations. Crime was down, productivity was up, and their military strength had grown substantially thanks to Kira's combat training programs. But success in leadership, Kira was learning, was more complex than victory in battle. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called. Fletcher entered, his expression carefully neutral in the way that always meant bad news. "Alpha Queen, we have a situation developing with the trade delegation from Silvercrest Pack." Kira's shoulders tensed. The Silvercrest negotiations had been ongoing for weeks, a complex agreement involving territory rights, resource sharing, and mutual defense pacts. Alpha Rebecca of Silvercrest was known for her diplomatic approach, preferring negotiation to confrontation. "What kind of situation?" Dominic asked. "They're requesting a private meeting with you, Alpha King. Specifically without Alpha Queen Kira present." The words hit the room like a physical blow. Kira felt her wolf bristle at the implied insult, but she kept her expression neutral. "Did they give a reason?" she asked quietly. Fletcher shifted uncomfortably. "They expressed concerns about negotiating with someone whose reputation is primarily martial in nature. They believe the discussions require a more diplomatic touch." "A more diplomatic touch," Kira repeated slowly. "Meaning they don't want to negotiate with the violent woman." Their words were more diplomatic than that, but... Fletcher shrugged helplessly. Dominic's face darkened with anger. "They can take their diplomatic concerns and..." "No!" Kira's voice cut through his building rage. "They're not entirely wrong." Both men stared at her in shock. "Kira," Dominic said carefully, "you've handled every negotiation since we took joint leadership. You're excellent at diplomacy." "I'm adequate at diplomacy," she corrected. "But my reputation precedes me. To most of the supernatural world, I'm still the shadow, a killer first and everything else second." She moved to the wall where a detailed map of their territory hung, studying the boundary lines that separated their land from Silvercrest's holdings. "The truth is, some conflicts can't be solved with violence. Some problems require patience, nuance, the ability to make people feel heard and valued." She turned back to them. "Maybe they have a point." "That's ridiculous," Fletcher protested. "You've led this pack brilliantly. The training programs, the social reforms, the economic improvements. All built on a foundation of fear," Kira interrupted. "Fear of what happens to those who oppose us. Fear of the Shadow's reputation." Dominic stood and moved to her side. "Fear and respect aren't the same thing." "Aren't they?" She met his eyes. "When wolves comply with our policies, is it because they believe in them or because they know I could kill them if they resist?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Outside, the afternoon training session was beginning, the sounds of combat practice drifting through the windows. "There's been talk," Fletcher said reluctantly. "Some of the pack members express concerns about the emphasis on combat training. They worry we're becoming too militaristic." "What kind of talk?" Dominic's voice carried the edge of alpha command. "Nothing treasonous," Fletcher said quickly. "Just questions about balance. Some feel that Alpha Queen Kira's approach favors warriors over scholars, fighters over healers." Kira felt something cold settle in her stomach. "They think I'm turning the pack into an army. They think you're preparing for a war that might not come," Fletcher clarified. "And some wonder if your preparations might actually cause the conflicts you're training to prevent." Before anyone could respond, another knock came at the door. This time it was Marcus, one of the younger pack members who'd been elevated to a diplomatic role based on merit rather than bloodline. "Forgive the interruption," he said, "but we've received word from the Ironwood Pack. They're formally requesting mediation in their border dispute with the Moonhaven Pack. Kira raised an eyebrow. They're asking us to mediate? Not the regional council. Specifically, they're requesting Alpha Queen Kira to serve as mediator. They believe her reputation for fairness and strength makes her ideal for resolving territorial conflicts. The irony wasn't lost on any of them. While Silvercrest questioned her diplomatic abilities, another pack was specifically requesting her intervention in a complex political situation. When do they need an answer? Dominic asked. The formal request needs a response within 48 hours. But there's another complication. Marcus glanced between them nervously. Several other territorial disputes have been referred to us in the past week. Our reputation for successful conflict resolution is spreading. Kira sank into her chair, suddenly feeling the weight of leadership pressing down on her shoulders. How many requests? 7 active mediation requests, 3 trade disputes, and 2 formal alliance proposals. Marcus consulted his tablet. We're being positioned as the de facto regional council for the Eastern Territories. That's significant, Dominic said slowly. That's terrifying, Kira corrected. We're 3 months into joint leadership, and suddenly we're responsible for regional stability? Success breeds responsibility, Fletcher observed. Other packs see how we've rebuilt after Garrett's rebellion, how we've balanced military strength with social progress. They want that stability for themselves. Kira stood and began pacing, her mind racing through the implications. But that's exactly the problem. They're looking to us because they see strength, not because they see wisdom. They want us to impose solutions through force rather than helping them find genuine resolutions. Is that necessarily bad? Marcus asked. If our intervention prevents wars, saves lives. It creates dependency, Kira interrupted. If every pack in the region starts bringing their problems to us, we become responsible for everyone's success or failure. And the moment we can't solve a problem with our usual methods, they'll turn on us, Dominic finished. Because we'll have proven that our approach isn't universal. A heavy silence fell over the room as the weight of their situation became clear. Success had brought them influence, but influence brought expectations they might not be able to meet. There's something else, Fletcher said reluctantly. Something you should know about Garrett's prison visits. Kira's attention snapped to him. What about them? The conversations aren't just about pack politics. He's been talking about you specifically, Alpha Queen. About your past, your methods, your psychological state. What kind of psychological state? Dominic's voice was dangerously quiet. He's suggesting that your leadership style is a trauma response. That someone who spent years killing for money can't truly transition to nurturing a community. Fletcher's discomfort was obvious. He's planting seeds of doubt about whether a former assassin can ever really become a protector. The words hit harder than any physical blow. Kira felt her carefully constructed confidence wavering as old insecurities rose to the surface. And people are listening to this? She asked. Some are. Especially pack members who've had family members disciplined under the new merit-based system. Wolves who lost status when bloodline privileges were eliminated. Kira moved back to the window, watching the training session below. Young wolves practiced combat techniques with dedication and skill, their movements precise and deadly. It was exactly what she'd wanted to achieve, a pack capable of defending itself against any threat. But looking at them now, she wondered if Fletcher and the Silvercrest delegation were right. Had she created warriors or weapons? Had she built strength or simply institutionalized violence? The Silvercrest meeting, she said finally. Schedule it. With both of us? Dominic asked. With you alone. The words tasted bitter, but she forced them out. Let them have their diplomatic negotiations without the violent woman complicating things. Absolutely not. Dominic's voice carried absolute finality. We lead together or not at all. Sometimes leadership means recognizing your limitations. Kira turned to face him, her expression resolute. If my presence at that table prevents a beneficial alliance, then my presence is a liability. Your presence is never a liability. Isn't it? She gestured toward the reports scattered across his desk. 7 packs want us to mediate their conflicts, but they want us to do it through strength and intimidation. 1 pack refuses to negotiate with me present because they see me as too violent. Garrett's using my past to undermine our authority from prison. She moved to stand before the map again, tracing the boundary lines with her finger. Maybe the problem isn't that others don't understand my capabilities. Maybe the problem is that my capabilities are too narrow for what leadership actually requires. That's Garrett talking, not you, Dominic said firmly. You're letting his poison work exactly as he intended. Am I? Or am I finally seeing clearly? Kira turned back to them. I've spent my entire adult life solving problems through violence. Underground fighting, assassination contracts, military tactics. It's all about breaking things and people until they comply with your will. And now you're building things, Marcus pointed out. The training programs, the social reforms, the diplomatic initiatives. All backed by the implicit threat of what happens to those who resist. Kira shook her head. I need to learn how to lead without that threat. How to convince instead of compel. How to inspire instead of intimidate. Fletcher and Marcus exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. What are you proposing? Dominic asked carefully. I'm proposing that I step back from active leadership until I can prove, to myself as much as to others, that I can be more than just a weapon pointed at our enemies. The silence that followed was deafening. You want to abdicate, Dominic said slowly. I want to earn the right to rule through something other than fear. Kira's voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly. I want to learn how to be the leader this pack deserves, not just the one they're afraid to oppose. And how exactly do you plan to do that? Kira looked out at the training grounds again, at the wolves practicing the combat techniques she'd taught them. Then she looked beyond them, to the gardens where elderly pack members tended vegetables, to the school where children learned reading and arithmetic, to the medical clinic where healers worked to keep everyone healthy. By learning from the people I've been too focused on protecting to actually listen to, she said quietly. By understanding what this pack needs beyond the ability to fight and win. She turned back to face them, decision crystallizing in her mind. Handle the Silvercrest negotiations. Accept the mediation requests, but approach them as opportunities for diplomacy rather than displays of force. And while you're doing that, I'm going to figure out how to become worthy of the crown I've been wearing. Kira, Dominic started. This isn't about self-doubt or Garrett's manipulation, she interrupted. This is about growth. About becoming the leader our pack needs for the long term, not just the crisis manager they needed during the rebellion. She moved toward the door, then paused and looked back. Besides, if I can't prove my value through something other than violence, then maybe Garrett is right about me. And that's a possibility I refuse to accept. As she left the office, Kira could hear Dominic and the others beginning to debate her decision. But for the first time in months, she felt like she was moving toward something instead of just reacting to threats. The crown's weight hadn't lessened. But maybe, just maybe, she was finally growing strong enough to bear it properly. Chapter 10. The emergency pack meeting had been called for dawn, but Kira had been awake since midnight, pacing her office while reading the reports that had arrived throughout the night. Each document brought worse news than the last, and by the time the first rays of sunlight crept through her windows, she felt like she was drowning in the consequences of choices made years ago. The Pinewood Pack has formally withdrawn from all trade agreements, Dominic said as he entered, carrying another stack of communications. They're citing moral concerns about supporting a regime led by a known killer. Kira didn't look up from the letter she was reading. That makes 3. Pinewood, Oakridge and Willowbrook. All demanding Garrett's release and my abdication within 30 days. Coincidentally, all 3 packs that have struggled economically since our alliance with Silvercrest gave us preferential trading status. Dominic set the new reports on her desk with barely controlled anger. This isn't about morality, it's about money. Is it? Kira finally looked up, her face drawn with exhaustion. Or is it about a killer trying to pretend she deserves to rule? The self-doubt in her voice made Dominic's expression soften. He moved around the desk to stand beside her chair, his hand coming to rest on her shoulder. This is exactly what Garrett wanted. He's been planning this campaign from the moment we locked him up. Then maybe he's smarter than we gave him credit for. Kira stood and moved to the window overlooking the pack grounds. Even at this early hour, she could see clusters of wolves engaged in hushed conversations, their body language tense and uncomfortable. A sharp knock interrupted them. Fletcher entered without waiting for permission, his face grim. We have a problem, he announced. A big one. Bigger than economic sanctions and demands for regime change? Kira asked dryly. Much bigger. Fletcher consulted his tablet, his expression growing darker. We've identified the source of the coordinated campaign against us. It's not just disgruntled packs acting independently. Dominic straightened, his alpha instincts immediately alert. Explain. Garrett's nephew, Ronan. The one who escaped during the rebellion. Fletcher pulled up a photograph on his tablet. A lean, dark-haired wolf in his 30s with Garrett's intelligent eyes and cruel mouth. He's been traveling between territories for the past month, meeting with pack leaders and spreading a very specific narrative. Kira felt ice form in her stomach. What kind of narrative? That Garrett was a patriot trying to preserve werewolf culture from foreign corruption. That you're not just a killer, but a sociopathic assassin who manipulated your way into power to satisfy your bloodlust. Fletcher's voice was carefully neutral, but his disgust was obvious. He's got documentation, photographs, even audio recordings allegedly proving his claims. What kind of documentation? Dominic's voice was deadly quiet. Fabricated evidence of your underground fighting career, Alpha Queen. Doctored images showing you torturing opponents, fake testimony from alleged survivors of your victims. It's sophisticated propaganda designed to paint you as a monster. Kira's hands clenched at her sides. And people are believing it? Some are. Especially in packs that never fully accepted the changes in pack hierarchy. Fletcher hesitated. There's more. Ronan claims to have evidence that you killed Connor deliberately, not accidentally. That the whole story about the fixed fight was a lie you fabricated to cover premeditated murder. The words hit like physical blows. Kira felt her carefully reconstructed sense of self beginning to crumble under the weight of accusations that, while false, contained enough truth to be believable. He's good, she said quietly. Take a real tragedy, add just enough fabricated details to make it monstrous, then spread it far enough that the truth can't catch up. It gets worse, Fletcher continued reluctantly. Some of our own pack members are starting to ask questions. Specifically about whether keeping you as Alpha Queen is worth the economic and political consequences. Dominic's growl was low and threatening. Which pack members? Primarily wolves who lost status under the merit-based advancement system, but also some who are genuinely concerned about the pack's future. Fletcher named several names, including some that surprised Kira. Elena, she asked. The healer? She's questioning my leadership. She's concerned about the impact on medical supply chains. 3 of our pharmaceutical suppliers have cut ties due to the Moral Concerns campaign. She's worried about being able to treat serious injuries or illnesses if the sanctions continue. Kira closed her eyes, feeling the weight of every decision she'd made since becoming Alpha Queen. Elena was a good wolf, dedicated to healing and helping others. If she was having doubts, there's a formal petition circulating, Fletcher added, requesting that you step down voluntarily to preserve pack unity and restore political stability. It has 43 signatures so far. Out of how many adult pack members? Dominic asked. 312. So a small minority. A growing minority, Fletcher corrected. And more importantly, they're some of our most essential members. Medical staff, teachers, engineers, agricultural specialists. People we can't afford to lose. Another knock interrupted them. This time it was Marcus, looking like he'd aged a decade overnight. The regional council has called an emergency session, he announced without preamble. 3 formal complaints have been filed against our pack leadership, specifically citing concerns about Alpha Queen Kira's fitness for office. Based on what grounds? Dominic demanded. Historical violence, psychological instability, and threat to regional security. Marcus consulted his notes. The complainants are requesting a formal review of her elevation to Alpha Queen, with the possibility of forced abdication if she's deemed unfit. Kira felt something break inside her chest. The regional council hadn't intervened in pack politics in over 50 years. For them to call an emergency session meant the situation had escalated beyond simple trade disputes. When is the session? She asked quietly. Next week. All parties involved are required to attend, including you and Alpha King Dominic. Marcus hesitated. There's also been a request for Garrett to testify via secure communication from his prison cell. Of course there has. Kira's laugh was bitter. Let the martyr speak from his cell about the monster who wrongfully imprisoned him. Kira, Dominic started. No. She held up a hand to stop him. This is exactly what he planned. Paint me as a killer, himself as a victim, and watch as political pressure forces me out of power. She moved to her desk and began gathering the reports, her movements sharp and controlled. The worst part is he's not entirely wrong. I am a killer. I did murder Connor, even if it was an accident. I did build my reputation on violence and fear. She looked up at the 3 men watching her. Maybe the question isn't whether Garrett's accusations are fair, but whether they're accurate enough that I have no business leading anyone. That's exactly what he wants you to think, Dominic said firmly. This self-doubt, this guilt, it's his weapon against you. Is it? Or is it finally facing the truth about what I am? Kira set down the papers and faced them fully. I've been Alpha Queen for 3 months. In that time, we've faced 2 major conflicts, and I've resolved both through violence. When Garrett rebelled, I fought. When political pressure mounted, my first instinct was to step back and let others handle diplomacy because I only know how to break things. You've done more than fight, Marcus protested. The social reforms, the training programs, the economic improvements. All built on the foundation of fear, Kira interrupted. Fear of what the shadow might do to anyone who opposes her. She walked to the window again, looking out at the pack members going about their morning routines. But now she saw the tension in their postures, the way they glanced nervously toward the pack house, the hushed conversations that stopped when others approached. They're afraid of me, she said quietly. Not just outsiders, our own people. They follow my orders because they're terrified of what happens if they don't. Some fear is necessary in leadership, Fletcher said carefully. Even the gentlest alpha needs to be respected. There's a difference between respect and terror. Kira turned back to them. When Elena questions whether keeping me as Alpha Queen is worth the medical supply shortages, that's not political maneuvering. That's a healer wondering if my presence is causing more harm than good. A commotion outside drew their attention. Through the window, they could see a crowd gathering near the main entrance, their voices rising in heated discussion. What now? Dominic muttered. Marcus was already checking his phone. Another delegation. This time from the Moonhaven Pack. They're demanding to speak with you immediately about the mediation request they filed last week. The territorial dispute with Ironwood? Kira asked. They want to withdraw the request. Apparently, they've decided they'd rather handle their problems internally than risk association with our pack's political instability. The words were like salt in an open wound. Even packs that had specifically requested their help were now backing away, afraid that association with them would damage their own reputations. How many other mediations are we going to lose? Dominic asked. All of them, probably, Marcus said grimly. Word travels fast in the supernatural community. If the regional council is questioning Alpha Queen Kira's fitness for office, other packs will distance themselves until the situation is resolved. Kira felt the walls closing in around her. Every decision she'd made, every choice that had seemed right at the time, was being weaponized against her. Garrett's poison was spreading through the community like a virus, infecting even those who had once supported her. There's something else, Fletcher said reluctantly. Something you need to know before the regional council session. More bad news? Kira asked. Ronan has been offering incentives to wolves willing to testify against you. Money, territory rights, favorable trade agreements. He's building a case based on purchased testimony. And people are taking his bribes? Some are. Wolves who lost money betting against the shadow in the underground fights. Former opponents' families who blame you for their loved ones' injuries. People who have genuine grievances mixed with fabricated ones. Kira sank into her chair, feeling the weight of her past crushing down on her. Every fight she'd won, every opponent she'd defeated, every choice she'd made in that brutal underground world was coming back to haunt her. We need to fight this, Dominic said firmly. Gather our own evidence, expose Ronan's lies, show the regional council what Garrett really is. With what proof? Kira asked. Everything I had was destroyed when I burned the Crimson Cage. The audio recording we used to expose Garrett's role in Connor's death is the only evidence we have, and even that could be dismissed as fabricated. Then we'll find other evidence. There have to be records, witnesses, something. Dominic. Kira's voice was quiet but final. What if they're right? The question stopped him cold. What if I really am too dangerous to lead? What if my past makes me unfit for this position? She looked around the office at the maps and reports and symbols of authority she'd tried so hard to earn. What if the best thing I can do for this pack is step aside before my presence destroys everything we've built? You don't mean that. Don't I? She stood and moved to the wall where her ceremonial weapons hung. The blades she'd carried as the shadow, now displayed as symbols of her journey from killer to leader. 3 months ago, I thought I could transform myself from a weapon into a protector. But maybe you can't change what you fundamentally are. The silence that followed was heavy with implications. Outside, the voices of the Moonhaven delegation grew louder, demanding answers that Kira wasn't sure she could provide. The regional council session, she said finally. I'll attend. I'll answer their questions and present my case. But I won't drag this pack down with me if the cost of keeping me as Alpha Queen becomes too high. Kira. No, Dominic. This is bigger than just us now. This is about the future of everyone who depends on our leadership. She turned to face them all. And if that future is better served by my abdication, then that's what I'll do. The words tasted like ashes in her mouth, but as she looked out at the pack she'd sworn to protect, Kira knew she meant every one of them. The poison was spreading, and she was running out of time to find an antidote. Chapter 11. The abandoned warehouse in the neutral territory between pack lands smelled of rust, decay, and old blood. Kira crouched behind a stack of rotting crates, watching through night vision scope as figures moved through the shadows 50 yards away. She'd been tracking Ronan's movements for 3 days, following a web of contacts and payments that had led her here, to this forgotten corner of the supernatural world. What she'd discovered made her sick to her stomach. 6 guards at the perimeter, she whispered into her throat mic, 2 at the main entrance for roaming patrol pattern. Standard underground ring security. Dominic's voice crackled back through her earpiece. Are you certain this is where Ronan's meeting his contacts? I'm certain. Kira adjusted her position, getting a better view through the grimy warehouse windows. And I'm certain about something else. This isn't just a meeting, it's an active fighting operation. Through the windows, she could see the unmistakable setup of an underground fighting ring. The makeshift arena in the center of the space, the elevated platform for high-paying spectators, the holding areas where fighters waited their turn. It was smaller than the Crimson Cage had been, but the layout was identical. How many people? Dominic asked. 40, maybe 50. Mixed crowd, some look like spectators, others like fighters. Kira's blood ran cold as she recognized several faces through her scope. Dominic, some of these wolves are from the packs that have been demanding my abdication. You're sure? Positive. I see 2 wolves from Pinewood Pack, at least 3 from Oak Ridge. They're not here as protesters, they're here as participants. The implications hit her like a physical blow. The same packs that had been condemning her violent past were actively participating in the underground fighting scene that had created the shadow. There's more, she continued, tracking movement around the arena. The setup here is too sophisticated for a new operation. This has been running for months, maybe longer. A figure emerged from the shadows near the arena, tall, lean, with dark hair that caught the artificial light. Even at this distance, Kira recognized him immediately. Ronan's here, she reported. And he's not just visiting, he's running the show. She watched as Garrett's nephew moved through the crowd with the easy confidence of someone completely in his element. He stopped to speak with several spectators, his body language that of a host entertaining important guests. I need to get closer, Kira said. I need to hear what they're discussing. Absolutely not. This is reconnaissance only. Dominic, if we're going to counter their propaganda campaign, we need evidence of what they're really doing here. Kira was already moving, slipping between the shadows toward the warehouse's side entrance. They're painting me as a bloodthirsty killer while they're actively perpetuating the system that created killers. Kira, wait! But she was already cutting off the communication, slipping the earpiece into her pocket as she approached the building. Years of underground experience guided her movements. How to approach without triggering motion sensors, where the blind spots in security coverage would be, how to move through a hostile environment without being detected. The side entrance was secured with a standard electronic lock, the kind that had protected underground venues for decades. Kira's lockpicking skills were rusty but functional, and within minutes she was inside the warehouse. The sounds hit her immediately. The roar of an excited crowd, the wet impact of flesh on flesh, the animalistic snarls of wolves pushed beyond their limits. It was exactly like the Crimson Cage, down to the metallic scent of blood and sweat that hung in the recycled air. She made her way through the shadows along the warehouse walls, staying well clear of the main floor where the action was taking place. From her elevated position on a catwalk, she had a perfect view of the arena below. 2 wolves were fighting in shifted form, their movements lacking the technical precision she remembered from her own fighting days. These weren't professionals, they were desperate amateurs, probably fighting for money or to settle debts. The kind of fighters that underground promoters loved because they were expendable. But what caught her attention wasn't the fight itself. It was the conversation taking place in the VIP section directly below her position. Been more profitable than we projected, Ronan was saying to a group of well-dressed wolves. The Eastern Territories have been hungry for this kind of entertainment since the Crimson Cage burned down. And the political situation with your uncle's pack? The speaker was an older female wolf that Kira didn't recognize. How does that affect our operations? It improves them, Ronan replied with satisfaction. The propaganda campaign against the Shadow is designed to serve multiple purposes. We discredit her leadership, destabilize her pack's political position, and remind the supernatural community why controlled violence is preferable to the chaos of amateur fighters. Kira felt ice form in her veins as the implications of his words became clear. Explain, the female wolf commanded. Simple. We demonstrate that trying to eliminate underground fighting doesn't make wolves less violent. It just makes their violence less predictable. Ronan gestured toward the arena where one of the fighters had just landed a devastating blow. The shadow tried to leave this world behind, tried to become a legitimate leader. But look what happened: civil war, political instability, economic sanctions. Violence followed her into the mainstream world. And your proposal? We offer an alternative. Controlled violence in regulated environments, with proper medical support and legal protections. We franchise the operation across multiple territories, offering each pack leadership a cut of the profits in exchange for official sanction. The female wolf nodded approvingly. Legitimizing the underground fights. Exactly. And once we've established that framework, we bring back the star attraction that made underground fighting truly profitable. Ronan's smile was predatory. The shadow herself. Kira's hands clenched around the catwalk railing hard enough to leave dents in the metal. She'll never agree to return, another voice said. A male wolf Kira recognized as someone from the Oak Ridge Pack delegation that had demanded her abdication. She will if the alternative is watching her pack face economic destruction and political isolation, Ronan replied confidently. We've already demonstrated our ability to turn public opinion against her. The next phase is making it clear that cooperation is her only path to redemption. And if she refuses, then we escalate. More packs join the sanctions, more evidence of her crimes surfaces, more pressure builds until her own pack demands her removal. Ronan's voice turned cold. One way or another, the shadow returns to where she belongs, fighting for our profit. The conversation continued, but Kira had heard enough. The entire campaign against her wasn't about justice or pack tradition. It was about forcing her back into slavery. Garrett and his allies weren't trying to destroy her. They were trying to own her. She began making her way back toward the exit, her mind racing with the implications of what she'd learned. But as she reached the side door, a hand fell on her shoulder. Well, the guest of honor arrives early. Kira spun to find herself facing 3 wolves in human form, all of them larger than her and positioned to block any escape route. The one who had spoken was familiar, Trevor's brother Nathan, who had disappeared after Garrett's first rebellion. Nathan, she said calmly, her body already shifting into combat stance. I was wondering where you'd gone. Ronan's been expecting you, Nathan replied. Said you were too curious for your own good. Always poking your nose where it doesn't belong. Like investigating criminal enterprises in neutral territory? Like failing to understand when you're beaten. Nathan's companions moved to flank her, their movements coordinated and practiced. You should have accepted exile when we offered it. Would have saved everyone a lot of trouble. Kira's mind catalogued escape routes and weapons. The warehouse was full of hostile wolves, her communication with Dominic was cut off, and she was outnumbered at least 20-1. In other words, it was just like old times. The offer's still open, Nathan continued. Ronan's got a proposal for you. A way to end this whole mess without any more bloodshed. I'm listening. Come back to the underground. Resume your career as the Shadow. Fight for us, and we'll call off the political campaign against your pack. Everyone gets what they want. You get to do what you do best. We get our star attraction back, and your precious pack gets to live in peace. And if I refuse? Nathan's smile was ugly. Then things get much worse for everyone you care about. The economic sanctions are just the beginning. We've got allies in a dozen territories, all of them willing to make life very difficult for anyone associated with your pack. You're talking about war. We're talking about business. The underground fighting scene is worth millions across the Eastern Territories. Your little retirement cost us a significant revenue stream, and we want it back. Kira looked around the warehouse, taking in the scope of the operation. This wasn't just about one fighting ring. It was an entire network, a supernatural criminal enterprise that had been operating in the shadows while she'd been trying to build a legitimate life. How long? She asked quietly. How long what? How long has Garrett been involved in this? How long have you been planning to drag me back? Nathan's expression told her everything she needed to know, but he answered anyway. Since the beginning. You think it was coincidence that Marcus Volkov approached you about fighting in the Crimson Cage? That you got matched against Connor Blackwood? His laugh was bitter. Garrett's been pulling strings in the underground scene for years, building toward this moment. The revelation hit her like a physical blow. Her entire career as the Shadow, Connor's death, her exile from that world, all of it had been orchestrated. "He set me up," she whispered. "He invested in you. Spent years making you the most feared fighter in the supernatural world, building your reputation and your value. And now it's time for that investment to pay off." Kira felt something snap inside her chest, not despair, but rage. Pure, clean fury at the manipulation, at the way her entire life had been twisted to serve someone else's agenda. "You want the Shadow back?" she said quietly, her voice carrying deadly promise. "That's the idea. Then you're about to get more than you bargained for." She moved with the speed and precision that had made her legend, her body flowing into the combat patterns that had once dominated underground fighting rings across 3 territories. Nathan was fast, but he wasn't prepared for the full force of the Shadow unleashed. Her first strike collapsed his windpipe before he could cry out. The second took his companion in the throat, severing arteries with surgical precision. The third wolf managed to get his hands up in a defensive posture, but Kira was already inside his guard, her knife, hidden in her boot until this moment, finding the space between his ribs. 3 bodies hit the warehouse floor in less than 10 seconds. Kira stood over them, breathing hard, her clothes splattered with blood. For a moment, she felt the old rush, the intoxicating combination of violence and victory that had once defined her existence. Then she heard footsteps running toward her position and remembered where she was. Time to go. She reached the exit as the first shouts of alarm echoed through the warehouse. Behind her, she could hear Ronan's voice screaming orders, organizing pursuit. But Kira was already disappearing into the darkness, moving with the ghost-like stealth that had earned her name. 20 minutes later, she reached the extraction point where Dominic was waiting with a vehicle, his face tight with worry. "Thank God," he said as she climbed into the passenger seat. "When your communication cut out." "Drive," she said tersely. "I'll explain on the way." As they sped away from the warehouse, Kira's mind was already working through the implications of what she'd learned. Garrett's conspiracy was bigger than they'd imagined, reaching back years and involving criminal enterprises across multiple territories. But she'd also learned something else, something that might be the key to turning this whole situation around. "Dominic," she said as the warehouse lights disappeared behind them, "I know how to beat them. But you're not going to like my plan." "Why?" Kira looked at her blood-stained hands, at the evidence of what she'd done when pushed back into her old world. "Because it requires me to become the Shadow again. One last time." Chapter 12. The war room had become a tribunal of angry voices, each one demanding blood with increasing fervor. Kira sat at the head of the long oak table. The evidence of Garrett's crimes spread before her like an indictment of her own past. Financial records, communication logs, witness testimonies. Every document painted the same damning picture of a conspiracy that stretched back years. "The law is clear," Beta James declared, his fist striking the table with enough force to rattle the water glasses. "Treason, conspiracy, conspiracy to commit murder, organization of criminal enterprises across pact territories. Each crime alone carries a death sentence." A chorus of agreement rose from the assembled pack leaders. Through the long windows, Kira could see crowds gathering in the courtyard below. Pack members who had come to witness what they assumed would be Garrett's final judgment. "Alpha Queen." Elder Morrison spoke from his position near the door, his ancient voice carrying the weight of tradition. "Pack law has governed our people for over 1,000 years. To ignore it now would set a precedent that undermines everything we stand for." Kira didn't respond immediately. She was studying the photograph in her hands. Ronan's surveillance image from the underground fighting ring, showing Garrett's nephew orchestrating the very system that had destroyed so many lives, including her own. "Tell me about pack law," she said quietly, her voice cutting through the heated discussions around the table. The room fell silent. "Elder Morrison, you've studied our traditions longer than anyone here. What does pack law say about justice?" The elderly wolf shifted uncomfortably. "Justice requires punishment proportional to the crime." "That's not what I asked." Kira set down the photograph and looked around the table. "I asked about justice, not punishment. What is the purpose of our legal system?" "To protect the pack," Fletcher answered hesitantly. "To maintain order," added Marcus. "To ensure that crimes have consequences," James said firmly. Kira nodded slowly. All valid answers, but incomplete. She stood and moved to the window, looking down at the crowd that had gathered to witness what they expected to be an execution. Justice serves three purposes in pack law, she continued. Punishment for the guilty, protection for the innocent, and restoration of social order. The question before us isn't whether Garrett deserves to die. The evidence makes that clear. The question is whether his death serves all three purposes. Of course it does, James protested. He's a traitor and a murderer. Executing him protects the pack from his influence and restores order by showing that such crimes won't be tolerated. Does it? Kira turned back to face them. Or does it create a martyr whose death fuels more rebellion than his life ever could? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Around the table, the pack leaders exchanged uncertain glances. Explain, Dominic said quietly. He'd been silent throughout the discussion, watching Kira work through the implications of their evidence. Garrett's greatest weapon has always been his ability to manipulate perception, Kira said. He spent months positioning himself as a defender of tradition, a patriot wrongfully imprisoned by a bloodthirsty usurper. If we execute him now, we validate every propaganda campaign Ronan has been spreading. But the evidence, Morrison began, will be dismissed as fabricated by his supporters, or ignored entirely by those who want to believe his version of events. Kira moved back to the table, her fingers tracing the financial records that showed Garrett's involvement in the underground fighting network. Dead martyrs are much more dangerous than living criminals. So what are you proposing? James asked, though his tone suggested he already suspected the answer. A public trial. Full transparency, complete evidence presentation, every victim given the chance to face their accuser and demand answers. Kira's voice was steady, but she could feel the shock radiating from the assembled wolves. Let Garrett defend his actions in front of everyone he's hurt. The explosion of voices was immediate and heated. That's insane. He'll use it as a platform for more propaganda. You're giving him exactly what he wants, attention and sympathy. Kira let them argue for several minutes before raising her hand for silence. I'm not finished. The room quieted, though the tension remained thick as smoke. The trial serves multiple purposes, she continued. First, it demonstrates that we have nothing to hide. Every piece of evidence, every witness testimony, every connection to the underground fighting rings, all of it made public record. And second, Dominic asked, it forces Garrett to answer for his crimes directly to his victims. Not to judges or legal experts, but to the people he's hurt. Connor's memory, the pack members he betrayed, the fighters who died in rings he funded. Kira's voice grew harder. He wants to be a martyr? Fine. Let him try to maintain that image while looking Emma Blackwood in the eye and explaining why her brother had to die for his profit. The room went dead silent. Emma, Connor's sister, the one whose medical treatments had supposedly motivated Garrett's actions, had been largely kept out of the political aftermath of her father's crimes. Bringing her into a public trial would be devastating to any narrative that painted Garrett as a grieving father. That's ruthless, Morrison said quietly. It's justice, Kira corrected. Real justice, not just revenge disguised as legal procedure. Fletcher leaned forward. And if he shows no remorse? If he uses the trial to spread more poison? Then we'll have demonstrated beyond any doubt what kind of man he really is. And the sentence will be carried out with the full support of everyone who witnessed his callousness. But if he does show genuine remorse? Marcus asked. Kira met his eyes steadily. Then I'll commute his death sentence to life imprisonment. Not out of weakness, but because true justice sometimes requires mercy. The words hit the room like a physical blow. Several pack leaders began speaking at once, their voices raised in protest and disbelief. You can't be serious. After everything he's done, the pack will never accept. Enough. Dominic's alpha command cut through the chaos like a blade. In the sudden silence, he looked around the table at each of the assembled leaders. Alpha Queen Kira has proposed a course of action that serves our interests better than simple execution, he said quietly. I support her decision. James stared at him in shock. Alpha King, with respect, this goes against every tradition we hold sacred. Does it? Dominic's voice carried a dangerous edge. Or does it demonstrate exactly the kind of strength and wisdom we need in a leader? Anyone can order an execution. It takes real courage to choose a harder path that serves the greater good. But what about pack law? Morrison protested. What about justice for his victims? What about it? Kira asked. His victims will get something more valuable than his death. They'll get the truth. All of it. And they'll get to see him face the consequences of his choices while he's still alive to suffer them. She moved around the table, making eye contact with each pack leader as she spoke. Garrett has spent his entire campaign painting me as a bloodthirsty killer who solves every problem with violence. Executing him plays directly into that narrative. But giving him a fair trial, letting him face his victims, and then choosing mercy if he shows genuine remorse? That demonstrates something much more powerful than the ability to kill. Which is? Fletcher asked. The strength to choose justice over vengeance. The wisdom to think beyond immediate satisfaction to long-term consequences. The leadership to make decisions based on what's best for the pack, not what feels most satisfying in the moment. The room was quiet now, the pack leaders processing the implications of her words. Outside, the crowd in the courtyard was growing larger, their voices rising as they demanded to know what was taking so long. There's another consideration, Marcus said slowly. The regional council session is still scheduled. If we execute Garrett before then, it looks like we're trying to silence him before he can testify. But if we put him on public trial, we demonstrate that we have nothing to fear from his testimony, Kira finished. Because we've already exposed every crime he's committed and given him the chance to defend himself. It's risky, Morrison said. If the trial goes badly, if he manages to win sympathy, then we'll deal with those consequences when they arise, Dominic interrupted. But I'd rather face those risks than hand our enemies a martyred hero on a silver platter. James was quiet for a long moment, his expression troubled. The pack won't understand. They want blood justice. They want to see Garrett pay for what he's done to us. Then we'll explain it to them, Kira said simply. We'll trust them to understand that true strength sometimes requires choosing the harder path. And if they don't accept your decision? Kira's smile was sharp as a blade. Then they'll have learned something important about their alpha queen. That I don't make decisions based on what's popular, but on what's right. Another long silence fell over the room. Through the windows, the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the courtyard where the crowd continued to grow. All in favor of Alpha Queen Kira's proposal? Dominic asked formally. Slowly, reluctantly, hands began to rise around the table. Not all of them, James and 2 others remained opposed, but enough to constitute a clear majority. Motion carried, Dominic announced. Beta Fletcher, make arrangements for a public trial to begin within 1 week. Full media coverage, complete transparency, every piece of evidence made available to the public record. And the charges? Fletcher asked. All of them, Kira said firmly. Treason, conspiracy to commit murder, organization of criminal enterprises, conspiracy to incite rebellion, fraud, and conspiracy to enslave. Let him answer for every crime we can prove. As the pack leaders began filing out to make preparations, Morrison approached Kira with a troubled expression. Alpha Queen, he said quietly, I hope you understand what you're risking. If this trial backfires, if Garrett manages to turn public opinion, then I'll face the consequences of my decision, Kira interrupted. But I won't become the monster he's spent months claiming I am just to satisfy the pack's thirst for blood. Morrison studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Perhaps that's exactly the kind of leader we need. After the room had cleared, leaving only Kira and Dominic, they stood together at the window watching the crowd below. Word was already spreading about the trial, and the pack members' reactions were mixed. Some seemed pleased by the prospect of public justice, others clearly wanted more immediate satisfaction. Second thoughts? Dominic asked quietly. Constantly, Kira admitted. But that doesn't mean it's the wrong decision. The pack leaders who opposed you, they're not necessarily wrong about the risks. No, they're not. This could backfire spectacularly. Garrett could turn the trial into a platform for his propaganda, could win sympathy by playing the grieving father. She turned to face him. But the alternative is handing him exactly what he wants. Martyrdom and the validation of every lie he's told about me. Dominic nodded slowly. And if he shows genuine remorse? If he actually accepts responsibility for his crimes? Then I'll keep my word and spare his life. Kira's voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly. Because that's what real justice looks like. Not revenge, but the possibility of redemption for those willing to accept it. Even for someone who orchestrated your entire life as the shadow? The question cut deep, hitting at the heart of her personal stakes in this decision. Garrett hadn't just betrayed their pack. He'd manipulated her entire existence, turning her into a weapon for his profit, and then trying to reclaim her when she'd attempted to build a different life. Especially for him, she said finally. Because showing mercy to someone who doesn't deserve it is the strongest possible demonstration that I'm not the monster he's claimed I am. Outside, The crowd was beginning to disperse as word spread about the upcoming trial. In 1 week, everything would be laid bare: Garrett's crimes, her past, the full truth about the conspiracy that had shaped all their lives. It was the biggest gamble of her leadership career. But as Kira watched the pack members discussing the news, she felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Peace with her decision. Win or lose, she was choosing justice over vengeance, mercy over blood. And for the first time since becoming Alpha Queen, she felt worthy of the crown. Chapter 13. The Great Hall had never held so many wolves. Every seat was filled, with overflow crowds standing along the walls and spilling out into the corridors beyond. Representatives from 12 different packs had come to witness what many were calling the trial of the century. The public reckoning of a wolf whose crimes had shaped the underground supernatural world for years. Kira sat at the judges' table, flanked by Elder Morrison and Alpha Patricia from the neutral Riverbank pack, who had agreed to serve as an impartial third judge. The afternoon sunlight streamed through the tall windows, illuminating the defendant's chair where Garrett would soon sit to face his accusers. The media presence was overwhelming. Cameras from supernatural news networks lined the back of the hall, their operators capturing every angle for broadcast across the territories. This trial would be seen by hundreds of thousands of wolves, making it the most public examination of pack justice in decades. "All rise for the defendant," Bailiff Nathaniel announced. The hall fell silent as Garrett was led in wearing prison shackles, his once proud bearing reduced to a shuffle. 3 months of imprisonment had taken their toll. His face was gaunt, his hair had gone gray, and his eyes held the haunted look of a wolf who had been stripped of all illusion about his fate. But as he settled into the defendant's chair, Kira caught a glimpse of the calculating intelligence that had made him dangerous. Even broken, even facing certain death, Garrett was still thinking, still planning. "The defendant will state his name for the record," Morrison announced. "Garrett Alexander Blackwood," he said, his voice hoarse but clear. "You stand accused of treason against this pack, conspiracy to commit murder, organization of criminal enterprises, fraud, conspiracy to incite rebellion, and conspiracy to enslave. How do you plead?" Garrett was quiet for a long moment, his eyes scanning the packed hall. When his gaze met Kira's, she saw something flicker there. Not quite defiance, but not surrender either. "Not guilty to all charges," he said finally. A ripple of angry murmurs swept through the crowd, but Kira had expected this. Garrett was too smart to make things easy for them. "Very well," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the hall. "The prosecution will present its case. But first, I want to address something unusual about these proceedings." She stood, commanding attention from every person in the room. "This trial is being conducted under ancient pack law, which gives every victim the right to face their accuser directly. That means you'll hear testimony not just from legal experts and investigators, but from the wolves whose lives were damaged by the defendant's actions." Garrett's lawyer, a sharp-faced female named Catherine, rose to object. "Your Honor, that's highly irregular. Emotional testimony can prejudice." "This isn't a human court, Counselor," Kira interrupted. "This is pack justice, where truth matters more than legal technicalities. The victims will be heard." The first witness was Detective Sarah from the Regional Crime Unit, who presented the financial evidence linking Garrett to the underground fighting network. Charts and bank records filled the screens around the hall, showing a paper trail that stretched back over a decade. The defendant received approximately $2.3 million over 10 years from various underground fighting organizations, Sarah testified. In return, he provided protection from law enforcement, helped launder money through legitimate pack businesses, and supplied information about potential fighters. Garrett's lawyer cross-examined aggressively, trying to create doubt about the evidence's authenticity, but the documentation was too thorough. Kira watched Garrett's face as the scope of his financial crimes was laid bare. He showed no emotion, but his hands gripped the arms of his chair with white-knuckled intensity. The second witness was Viktor Kozlov, the Russian weapons dealer who had helped Kira during the rebellion. His testimony was delivered via secure video link from an undisclosed location. "Garrett Blackwood approached me 5 years ago." Victor's gravelly voice filled the hall through the speakers. "He wanted to purchase weapons and training for what he called future security needs. I thought he was preparing for external threats. I did not know he was planning to overthrow his own Alpha." "What kind of weapons?" the prosecutor asked. "Military grade. Assault rifles, explosives, tactical equipment designed for urban warfare. Enough to equip a small army. More evidence, more documentation, more proof of the scope of Garrett's conspiracy. But Kira could see that the crowd was growing restless. This was important testimony, but it felt clinical, removed from the real human cost of his crimes. "Call Emma Blackwood," she announced. The hall went dead silent as Connor's sister was led to the witness stand. Emma was 23 now, her brother's death and her father's crimes having aged her beyond her years. She moved with a quiet dignity that commanded respect from everyone present. "Emma," the prosecutor said gently, "please tell the court about your relationship with the defendant." "He's my father," Emma said simply. "And he's the reason my brother is dead." Garrett flinched as if he'd been slapped, his composure cracking for the first time since the trial began. "Can you explain what you mean by that?" Emma's voice was steady, but tears streamed down her face as she spoke. "When I was 19, I was diagnosed with a rare genetic condition that required expensive treatment. My father told me he would find a way to pay for it, that I shouldn't worry about the cost." She looked directly at Garrett, who had gone pale. "I didn't know that finding a way meant selling my brother's life. I didn't know Connor was fighting in illegal rings to pay my medical bills. And I didn't know that my father had arranged for Connor to be drugged, so he would lose control and force his opponent to kill him." "How did you learn the truth?" "From the audio recording played at his first trial. I heard my father's voice agreeing to Connor's death in exchange for money." Emma's voice broke, but she continued. "My brother died believing he was saving my life. But the truth is, our father killed him for profit and used my illness as justification." Garrett's lawyer objected, but Kira overruled her. This was exactly the kind of testimony that PAC justice demanded, victims confronting their abusers directly. "Emma," Kira said gently, "what would you say to your father now if you could?" Emma turned to face Garrett fully, her eyes blazing with grief and fury. "I would ask him if it was worth it. If the money was worth Connor's life. If his greed was worth destroying our family." Her voice rose with emotion. "I would ask him how he sleeps at night knowing that his own son died calling his name, begging for help that never came." Garrett's composure finally shattered. He buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with sobs that echoed through the silent hall. But Emma wasn't finished. "And I would tell him that I've refused every penny of the blood money he earned from Connor's death. That I'd rather die from my condition than live one more day knowing my brother's murder paid for my treatment." The impact of her words was devastating. Around the hall, hardened warriors wiped tears from their eyes, and even some of Garrett's supporters looked shaken. The testimony continued throughout the day. Maria Santos, the former military sniper who had helped during the rebellion, testified about Garrett's attempts to recruit her for assassination missions. Dr. Rebecca Chun, the PAC's head medic, described how Garrett had diverted medical supplies to the underground rings where fighters often died from treatable injuries. But it was the testimony of the Omega Wolves that truly broke him. Theodore, an elderly maintenance worker, described years of abuse and humiliation at Garrett's hands. "He would assign me to clean the detention cells after interrogations," Theodore said quietly. "Said it was fitting work for someone of my rank. I had to scrub blood off walls while he watched and laughed." Iris, a young female who worked in the PAC's childcare center, testified about Garrett's threats against Omega children. He said that if the Omegas didn't stay in line, their children would be the first to suffer. He used our own babies as leverage to ensure our compliance. With each testimony, Garrett seemed to shrink further into himself. The confident manipulator was disappearing, replaced by a broken wolf forced to confront the full scope of his cruelty. The final witness was David, a former underground fighter who had been paralyzed in one of Garrett's rings. "I fought for 3 years in circuits he controlled," David said from his wheelchair. "The safety equipment was never properly maintained, medical staff was minimal, and fighters were pushed beyond their limits for spectacle. When I was injured, they left me on the arena floor for 20 minutes before calling for help." "What were the long-term consequences of your injuries?" the prosecutor asked. "Complete spinal severance. I'll never walk again, never shift to wolf form, never have the chance to start a family." David's voice was matter-of-fact, but his pain was obvious. All so rich wolves could bet on blood sport. He turned his wheelchair to face Garrett directly. "Do you even remember my name?" he asked quietly. Garrett looked up, his face streaked with tears. David Morrison. You were fighting to pay for your mother's funeral." "That's right. And when I was injured, what did you do?" Garrett's voice was barely a whisper. "Nothing. I did nothing. You did worse than nothing. You had me blacklisted from every medical facility in the territory, so I couldn't file insurance claims that might expose the ring's safety violations." The accusation hung in the air like a death sentence. Around the hall, the observers had gone completely silent, stunned by the depth of Garrett's callousness. "David," Kira said gently, "what would justice look like to you?" The paralyzed wolf considered the question for a long moment. "I used to want him dead. Used to dream about watching him suffer the way he made me suffer." He looked at Garrett, who was still weeping silently. "But looking at him now, I think he's already suffering more than I ever could have imagined." When the testimony phase finally ended, the hall buzzed with quiet conversations as observers processed what they had heard. The evidence against Garrett was overwhelming. But more than that, the human cost of his crimes had been laid bare in excruciating detail. "Does the defendant wish to make a statement?" Morrison asked. Garrett's lawyer started to advise him against speaking, but he waved her off. Slowly, painfully, he rose to his feet and faced the packed hall. "I," he started, then stopped, his voice failing him. He tried again, his words coming out broken and halting. "Everything you've heard today is true. Every crime, every betrayal, every life I destroyed for money or power or pride." His voice grew stronger as he continued. "I told myself I was protecting pack tradition, that I was defending our way of life. But the truth is, I was just a criminal who used noble words to justify evil actions." He turned to face Emma, his daughter, who sat in the front row. "Emma, my darling girl, I am so sorry. I killed your brother, destroyed our family, and tried to make you complicit in his murder by using his blood money for your treatment. There is no forgiveness for what I've done, but I need you to know that Connor's last words were your name. He died believing he was saving you, and that belief was the only pure thing in the whole sordid business." Emma was sobbing now, but she didn't look away. Garrett turned to David next. "David, you asked if I remembered your name. I remember all of their names. Every fighter who was injured or killed in rings I profited from. Their faces haunt my dreams, and they should. I robbed you of your future for the sake of a few dollars in my pocket." Finally, he faced Kira directly. "Alpha Queen, you've shown me more mercy than I deserve by giving me this trial. I expected to be executed without ceremony, and I would have deserved it." His voice was steady now, filled with a strange kind of peace. "I orchestrated your entire career as the Shadow. I manipulated your fights, including the one that killed Connor. I tried to use you as a weapon, then tried to reclaim you as property when you escaped." He paused, gathering himself for his final words. "I confess to every charge brought against me. I am guilty of treason, murder, conspiracy, and every other crime you've accused me of. I don't ask for forgiveness, I don't deserve it. But I do ask for the chance to make amends." "What kind of amends?" Kira asked. "I know where every underground ring operates across the Eastern Territories. I have records of every fighter, every promoter, every politician who took bribes to look the other way. I can give you everything you need to shut down the entire network permanently." The offer hung in the air like a lifeline thrown to a drowning man. "In exchange for what?" Morrison asked. "Life imprisonment instead of execution. Not because I deserve to live, but because the information I have can save the lives of fighters still trapped in that world." Kira looked around the hall, reading the faces of the observers. The anger was still there, but it was mixed with something else now, a recognition that Garrett's broken confession had accomplished something that his execution never could. He had destroyed the mythology around his cause completely. "The court will recess to consider the defendant's offer," she announced. "Judgment will be rendered tomorrow morning." As the hall emptied, Garrett was led back to his cell, leaving behind a room full of wolves who had witnessed something unprecedented. A monster who had finally seen his own reflection and been horrified by what he found. The trial was over. Now came the hardest part, deciding whether mercy was justice, or whether some crimes were simply unforgivable. But as Kira looked at the empty witness stand where so many victims had found their voices, she felt something she hadn't expected. Hope that even the worst of them could find their way back to humanity, if they were willing to face the truth about what they had become. Chapter 14. The industrial district outside Minneapolis had been built for manufacturing, but the abandoned factories now served a darker purpose. Kira crouched on the rooftop of a derelict textile plant, studying the compound through night vision scope as cars arrived in steady streams. Below, well-dressed wolves handed over cash to heavily armed guards before disappearing into what had once been a loading dock. The Midnight Coliseum, one of the largest underground fighting operations in the Central Territories. And tonight, thanks to Garrett's information, it would be the first to fall. Thermal imaging shows approximately 300 people inside, Marcus reported through her earpiece, his voice crackling with static. 26 armed guards on perimeter duty, another dozen inside the main arena. Kira adjusted her tactical vest, checking the non-lethal weapons Dominic had insisted she carry. Tonight wasn't about killing, it was about liberation. Medical team status? She asked. Dr. Chen's unit is standing by 2 blocks north. Fletcher's voice came through the comm, full trauma surgery capability, plus sedatives for withdrawal management. Many of the fighters trapped in these rings were addicted to the combat stimulants that kept them competitive. Breaking their physical chains would be easier than breaking their chemical dependencies. Extraction vehicles? Ready and waiting. We've got transport for up to 50 fighters, plus emergency medical evacuation if needed. Kira closed her eyes and let herself remember the last time she'd entered an underground fighting venue. The Crimson Cage, 2 years ago, when she'd still been the Shadow. The roar of the crowd, the metallic scent of blood, the desperate hunger in the fighters' eyes as they battled for scraps of money and fleeting glory. Tonight would be different. Tonight, she wasn't coming to fight. She was coming to break the whole system apart. Alpha Queen, you don't have to do this personally. Dominic's voice was tense with worry. We can coordinate the assault from here. No, she said firmly. This isn't just about shutting down illegal operations. It's about facing what I used to be and proving that change is possible. She stood and moved toward the rope she'd used to rappel down to the compound. Besides, these ring masters know me. They'll try to negotiate or buy their way out when they see regular law enforcement. But when they see the Shadow, they'll know their time is up, Marcus finished. Exactly. All teams final equipment check. We go in 5 minutes. Around the compound, tactical teams from 6 different packs took their positions. This wasn't just Kira and Dominic's operation. After Garrett's trial, packs across the region had volunteered to help dismantle the underground network. The publicity from the trial had made it politically impossible for any legitimate pack leadership to appear soft on illegal fighting. Team Alpha in position, came Victor's voice. The Russian weapons dealer had volunteered his mercenary contacts for the operation, seeing it as a chance to eliminate competition from less ethical operators. Team Beta ready, reported Captain Riley from the Regional Enforcement Division. Team Gamma standing by, added Commander Torres from the Federal Supernatural Crimes Unit. Kira checked her watch. 60 seconds. Remember, minimum force necessary. These fighters are victims, not criminals. The ring masters and promoters are our primary targets. She rappelled down the side of the building, her movements silent and controlled. The loading dock entrance was guarded by 2 wolves in human form, both armed with automatic weapons. Kira approached from their blind spot, using shadows and industrial debris for cover. Her first taser dropped the left guard before he could react. The second guard spun toward the sound, but Kira was already moving, her hand clamping over his mouth while the taser found its mark. Both wolves collapsed unconscious, their weapons secured. Entry point Alpha clear, she whispered into her mic. Copy that. Team Beta moving to secondary entrance. Kira slipped through the door and into the belly of the beast. The Midnight Coliseum was larger than the Crimson Cage had been, but the layout was sickeningly familiar. A sunken arena dominated the center of the space, surrounded by elevated seating for spectators who paid premium prices to watch wolves tear each other apart. The air was thick with smoke, sweat, and the metallic scent of blood. In the arena, 2 fighters circled each other with the desperate intensity she remembered too well. One was barely more than a boy, his ribs visible through his skin, fighting with the jerky movements of someone high on combat stimulants. His opponent was older, scarred, moving with the careful precision of a veteran who knew this might be his last fight. Kira felt her wolf stir with familiar bloodlust, and for a moment she was back in her old life, calculating odds and planning her next victory. Then she remembered why she was here, and the feeling transformed into something else entirely. Righteous fury. She made her way through the shadows toward the VIP section, where the real criminals would be watching their investment. The crowd was the same mix she remembered. Wealthy wolves looking for entertainment, criminals laundering money through betting, and hangers-on who fed off the violence like parasites. Target acquired, she whispered, spotting a familiar figure in the VIP box. Alexei Petrov, the man who had recruited her into underground fighting 8 years ago. He looked older now, his face lined with the stress of running an illegal empire, but his eyes held the same predatory intelligence that had once terrified a desperate young wolf into signing her life away. Kira began moving toward the VIP section, but a commotion in the arena drew her attention. The younger fighter had collapsed, foam bubbling from his mouth as his body convulsed. Stimulant overdose, a common sight in the underground scene. The crowd barely reacted. A few boos, some angry shouts about lost bets, but no one moved to help the dying wolf. That was when Kira's patience ran out. She vaulted over the barrier separating the spectator area from the arena floor, landing in a crouch beside the convulsing fighter. The crowd's reaction was immediate: gasps, shouts, confused murmurs as they tried to process what they were seeing. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer's voice boomed over the speakers, "it appears we have an unexpected." The announcer's voice cut off abruptly as recognition dawned. Kira stood slowly, letting the arena lights illuminate her face for the first time in 2 years. "The Shadow," someone whispered, and the name rippled through the crowd like wildfire. Kira ignored them, focusing on the overdosed fighter. She administered a stimulant neutralizer from her medical kit, then checked his vital signs. He was young, maybe 19, with the lean build of someone who hadn't eaten a proper meal in weeks. "He needs immediate medical attention," she called to Dr. Chen over her radio. "Stimulant overdose, possible cardiac arrest." Around the arena, the crowd was in chaos. Some spectators were trying to leave. Others were pulling out phones to record what might be the Shadow's return to fighting. But Kira wasn't looking at them. She was looking at Alexei Petrov, who had gone pale in the VIP box. "Hello, Alexei," she said, her voice carrying clearly in the sudden quiet. "We need to talk." Security guards were moving toward the arena now, but they approached cautiously. The Shadow's reputation made her dangerous to corner, and none of them were eager to test whether retirement had made her soft. "This is private property," one guard called out. "You're trespassing." "I'm investigating criminal activity," Kira replied, pulling out her official Alpha Queen badge. "And you're all under arrest." That was the signal. Tactical teams burst through every entrance simultaneously, their movements coordinated and overwhelming. Flashbang grenades went off in strategic locations, disorienting the guards and creating confusion among the spectators. Within seconds, the Midnight Coliseum was swarming with law enforcement. "Nobody move," Captain Riley's voice boomed through a megaphone. "This facility is being raided under joint territorial authority." All spectators remained seated with hands visible. The arena dissolved into controlled chaos as officers began separating spectators from ring personnel. Kira made her way toward the VIP section, where Alexei was frantically trying to destroy documents. "Going somewhere?" she asked as she reached his box. Alexei looked up from the papers he was shredding, his face a mask of barely controlled panic. "The Shadow. I should have known you'd be behind this." "Not the Shadow anymore," Kira corrected. "Alpha Queen Kira. And you're under arrest for conspiracy, racketeering, and about a dozen violations of territorial law. You can't do this. I have rights, legal protections." "From who?" "The criminal network that's being dismantled tonight." Kira gestured toward the chaos in the arena below. "This is happening simultaneously at every ring in the Eastern Territories. Your whole operation is finished." Alexei's composure finally cracked. "You don't understand what you're destroying. These fighters need this. It's the only way they can make money, the only place they belong. They belong in legitimate employment, with medical care and legal protections," Kira shot back. "Not in a cage fighting for your profit," says the wolf who made her fortune in exactly these cages. The accusation hit home, but Kira had been preparing for this moment for months. "You're right," she said simply. "I did make my fortune here. I let myself become a weapon for your entertainment, and I convinced myself it was the only choice I had." She stepped closer, her presence forcing him back against the wall. "But I was wrong. There are always choices, Alexei. I chose to leave this world behind and build something better. Tonight, I'm giving these fighters the same choice." Around them, officers were processing the spectators and ring personnel. The fighters themselves were being treated with surprising gentleness: medical evaluations, counseling services, job placement assistance. Everything that had never been available in the underground world. "Team leaders sound off," Kira said into her radio. "Team Alpha successful. Crimson Palace shut down, 15 arrests, 8 fighters in medical care. Team Beta reporting. Iron Fist Arena cleared, 22 arrests, 12 fighters extracted. Team Gamma confirming. Blood Pit operation terminated, 30 arrests, 6 fighters requiring immediate medical intervention." One by one, the reports came in. By dawn, the entire underground fighting network across the Eastern Territories would be dismantled. As officers led Alexei away in restraints, he turned back to her one last time. "This won't last," he said bitterly. "Violence is in their nature. You can't change what they are." "Watch me," Kira replied. The cleanup took hours. Fighters who had been trapped in the underground world for years were processed through medical and social services, offered job training, housing assistance, and most importantly, a way out of the cycle of violence that had consumed their lives. Some accepted immediately, desperate to escape. Others were suspicious, having been betrayed too many times to trust easily. A few refused entirely, convinced they had no skills beyond fighting. But Kira spoke to each one personally, sharing her own story of escape and transformation. Not as the Shadow, the legendary fighter, but as someone who had been exactly where they were now. "I know it seems impossible," she told Maria, a scarred female fighter who had been competing for 6 years. "I know you feel like violence is all you're good for. But I felt the same way, and I was wrong." "You were the Shadow," Maria replied. "You were the best there ever was. I'm just this." She gestured to herself, to the bruises and scars that covered her thin frame. "I was a trapped animal fighting for scraps," Kira corrected. "Just like you. The only difference is that I found people willing to help me remember I was more than that." She handed Maria a card with contact information for job training programs. "When you're ready, not if, when, call this number. There's a whole world outside these cages, and you deserve to see it." As the sun rose over Minneapolis, the last of the arrested ring masters were loaded into transport vehicles. The Midnight Coliseum stood empty, its blood-stained arena already being dismantled by demolition crews. "How do you feel?" Dominic asked as they watched the building being torn down. Kira considered the question carefully. "Different. Like I've finally closed a door that's been hanging open for years." "Any regrets? About destroying the rings?" "No." She turned to face him. "But I do regret that it took me so long to realize I could use my past to help others instead of being haunted by it." Her radio crackled with a final report from Captain Riley. "All operations complete. Total arrests, 137. Fighters extracted and entering support programs, 83. No casualties. Outstanding work, everyone," Kira replied. "Let's go home." As they drove away from the ruins of the Midnight Coliseum, Kira felt something she hadn't experienced since becoming Alpha Queen: complete peace with her past. The underground fighting world that had shaped her, controlled her, and nearly destroyed her was finally, truly finished. But more than that, she had transformed her greatest source of shame into her greatest strength. Every fighter she had helped rescue would have a chance at the redemption she had found. Every ring they had destroyed was one less place where desperate wolves would be exploited. The Shadow was dead. In her place stood Alpha Queen Kira, protector of the innocent and destroyer of the systems that preyed on desperation. The chains were broken, and she had been the one to break them. Chapter 15. 6 months after the destruction of the underground fighting network, the Pack House had transformed beyond recognition. Where once there had been rigid hierarchies and whispered conversations, now there was an energy that hummed through every corridor. The sound of wolves building something unprecedented together. Kira stood in what had once been the formal dining hall, watching as Maria and 3 other former underground fighters worked alongside Pack engineers to install equipment for the new rehabilitation center. The scarred female who had been so suspicious of help 6 months ago now moved with quiet confidence, her mechanical aptitude making her invaluable to the construction team. "The medical bay should be operational by next week," Dr. Chin reported, consulting her tablet as she joined Kira at the observation window. "We've got specialized equipment for treating combat injuries, plus a dedicated wing for addiction recovery." "How many are enrolled in the program now?" Kira asked. 47 former fighters across all phases of rehabilitation. Some are still dealing with physical recovery from years of abuse. Others are learning job skills for the first time in their lives. Dr. Chen's expression was proud. "Maria's becoming our lead technical instructor. She's got a gift for explaining complex systems in ways that make sense to people who never had formal education." Through the window, they watched Maria patiently show a young male wolf how to calibrate a piece of diagnostic equipment. The teacher was teaching, the wounded were healing, and the lost were finding purpose. "Alpha Queen," Timothy approached from behind them, no longer the nervous Omega who had once scrubbed floors in obscurity. 6 months of merit-based advancement had transformed him into a confident administrator whose organizational skills had proven invaluable. "Yes, Timothy? The Pack Council meeting is ready to begin. All sector representatives are present." Kira nodded, though part of her still marveled at how different these meetings were from the old pack gatherings. Instead of a handful of high-ranking wolves making decisions for everyone else, the pack council included representatives from every area of pack life: medical, education, agriculture, engineering, arts, and yes, even the Omega sectors that had been voiceless for too long. The council chamber had been redesigned to reflect this new philosophy. Gone was the imposing high table where Alpha Authority had once looked down on subordinates. In its place was a circular arrangement of seats, with Kira and Dominic's chairs no higher than anyone else's. "Before we begin today's agenda," Dominic said as the session opened, "I want to address the concerns that were raised about the new housing development." Eleanor, the pack's head of agriculture, leaned forward. "The concern isn't about the development itself, it's about the location. Building on the eastern meadows will impact our crop rotation schedule and could affect food production." "What about the alternative site near the old training grounds?" asked Benjamin, representing the education sector. "Too close to the school," replied Rachel from Childcare Services. "Construction noise would disrupt classes for months." Kira listened to the discussion with quiet satisfaction. These wolves were thinking like partners, considering how their decisions affected the entire community rather than just their own sectors. It was exactly what she and Dominic had hoped to achieve. "What if we modified the original plan?" suggested Maria, who now represented the rehabilitation program. "Smaller buildings with green roofs that could actually enhance agricultural productivity rather than competing with it." The suggestion sparked a flurry of productive discussion as the representatives worked together to find a solution that served everyone's needs. This was collaborative leadership at its finest, using the collective wisdom of the entire pack rather than relying on the judgment of just two wolves, no matter how capable. After the council meeting concluded, Kira made her rounds through the pack grounds, a ritual she'd established to stay connected with daily life beyond the administrative bubble. The changes were visible everywhere. New construction projects that housed former fighters alongside longtime pack members, gardens where Omegas worked beside Betas to grow food for the community, workshops where traditional craftswolves taught their skills to anyone interested in learning. At the new school, she found children of all ranks playing together during recess, their games unmarked by the social divisions that had once defined pack culture. A young alpha pup was carefully explaining arithmetic to an Omega child, while nearby, a beta female organized a group art project that included everyone regardless of their family's status. "Hard to believe this is the same place, isn't it?" Fletcher joined her at the playground fence, his expression thoughtful. "Sometimes I wonder if we're moving too fast," Kira admitted. "Changing so much so quickly. Are we? Or are we finally catching up to where we should have been all along?" Fletcher gestured toward the playing children. "Look at them. They don't see rank or status, they just see playmates. Maybe that's what pack life was supposed to be before we complicated it with artificial hierarchies." Kira nodded, though her attention was drawn to a commotion near the school's entrance. A well-dressed female wolf was arguing with the teacher on duty, her voice rising with aristocratic indignation. Beatrice Hawthorne, Fletcher identified the woman with a slight grimace. "Old guard family, owns the textile mills outside town. She's been resistant to some of the changes." Kira walked over to investigate, arriving just as Beatrice's voice reached a peak of outrage. "Absolutely unacceptable for my daughter to be taught alongside Omegas. The very idea compromises her education and social development." The teacher, a patient beta male named Gregory, was maintaining his composure despite the verbal assault. "Mrs. Hawthorne, our new integrated education model has actually improved test scores across all student populations. When children learn together, they all benefit. I don't care about test scores. I care about proper social order." Beatrice's eyes fell on Kira, and her expression shifted to barely concealed hostility. "Alpha Queen, perhaps you can explain why my family's generous donations to this pack give us no voice in educational policies." "Your donations are appreciated," Kira replied calmly, "but they don't give you the right to segregate children based on their parents' social status. This isn't segregation, it's maintaining standards. These Omega children haven't been raised with proper values or education. They'll hold back the students who matter." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Around them, other parents had gathered, some nodding agreement with Beatrice, others looking uncomfortable with her directness. "Mrs. Hawthorne," Kira said quietly, "every child in this pack matters. Every single one. If you're concerned about educational standards, I invite you to volunteer as a tutor or donate educational materials. But you don't get to decide which children deserve quality education. And if I withdraw my family's support from PAC operations? If other traditional families follow suit? Beatrice's threat was clear. Then we'll find other ways to fund our programs, Dominic said as he approached the group. We've built this community on the principle that every PAC member has value. We won't compromise that principle for any amount of money. Beatrice stared at them both for a long moment, clearly calculating whether to escalate the confrontation. Finally, she turned and stalked away, but not before delivering a parting shot. This experiment of yours won't last. Wolves need hierarchy, need to know their place. When chaos comes, and it will come, don't expect the traditional families to clean up your mess. As she departed, the gathered parents began to disperse, their conversations muted but intense. Change, Kira reflected, was never universally welcomed. How many families like the Hawthorns are we dealing with? She asked Fletcher quietly. Maybe a dozen that are openly resistant. Another 20 or so that are uncomfortable but not actively opposing us. Fletcher's expression was thoughtful. The question is whether their discontent remains grumbling or becomes organized opposition. Let them organize, Dominic said firmly. We're not going back to a system where some wolves matter more than others just because they have older bloodlines or bigger bank accounts. That evening, as Kira and Dominic reviewed the day's reports in their shared office, they reflected on how much had changed since their first confrontational meeting in this very room. Remember when you called me the weakest link in the pack? Kira asked with a wry smile. I remember being an arrogant ass who confused fear with respect, Dominic replied. And I remember you letting me think I was in control right up until you put me on my back in the fighting ring. We've both learned a few things since then. We have. Though I have to ask, any regrets about the path we've chosen? About dismantling traditional pack structures? Kira considered the question seriously. I regret that change is painful for some wolves. I regret that people like Beatrice feel threatened by equality. But I don't regret building something better than what we inherited. She moved to the window overlooking the pack grounds, where security lights illuminated the construction sites where tomorrow's foundation would be poured. Look at what we've built, Dominic. Former fighters working alongside engineers. Omega children learning beside alpha pups. Wolves of all ranks having a voice in their own governance. It's not perfect, he said, joining her at the window. No, it's not. But it's better. And it's ours, all of ours, not just the privileged few. She leaned against him, drawing comfort from his solid presence. When I was the shadow, I fought for money and survival. Now I'm fighting for something much more important. Which is the right of every wolf in this pack to reach their full potential, regardless of what rank they were born into. She smiled as she watched a night shift maintenance crew that included both former underground fighters and traditional pack members working side by side. Maria told me yesterday that she's planning to apply for engineering certification. A year ago, she was fighting in illegal rings just to afford basic medical care. Now she's designing systems that will help other wolves heal. That's the kind of transformation that makes all the political headaches worthwhile, Dominic agreed. Speaking of political headaches, Kira said with a slight grimace, we got another formal complaint from the regional council about our radical departures from traditional pack governance. Let them complain. Other packs are starting to adopt similar reforms. The Riverbank Pack just announced their own merit-based advancement system, and the Mountain View Pack is establishing integrated education programs. Change is spreading, like wildfire, and the traditionalists know it, which is why they're getting desperate. Dominic's expression grew serious. We need to be prepared for escalation. Wolves like Beatrice don't give up their privileges without a fight. Then we'll face that challenge when it comes. Together. Kira turned from the window to look at him directly. You know what I've realized over these past months? What's that? True strength isn't about dominating others or maintaining hierarchies. It's about lifting up everyone around you until the whole community is stronger than any individual could be alone. Dominic smiled, the expression transforming his often serious features. That's very philosophical for a former assassin. I learned it from watching the Pack Council work together. From seeing former fighters become teachers and healers. From watching children play without caring about their parents' social status. She moved back to their desk, where plans for the next phase of construction lay spread across the surface. We're not just rebuilding a pack, Dominic. We're redefining what pack leadership can be. As if to underscore her point, a soft knock came at the door. Timothy entered with the evening reports, But instead of the nervous deference he had once shown, he moved with quiet confidence. "The housing project vote results are in," he announced. "The modified green roof design passed unanimously. Construction begins next week." "Outstanding. Any other business?" "Maria asked me to tell you that the first class of rehabilitation program graduates will be ready for job placement next month. She's got 12 wolves who've completed vocational training and are eager to contribute to pack operations." Kira felt a warm glow of satisfaction. 12 lives transformed from exploitation to empowerment. 12 wolves who would never again be trapped in the cycle of violence that had once defined their existence. "Tell her I'll personally review the placement options. I want to make sure each of them finds work that matches their skills and interests." "Yes, Alpha Queen." After Timothy left, Kira and Dominic returned to their planning, but the atmosphere was different now. Not the urgent crisis management that had defined their early leadership, but the satisfying work of building something lasting. "You know what the best part is?" Kira said as she reviewed blueprints for the new community center. "Tell me." "We're proving that it's possible. That wolves don't have to accept arbitrary hierarchies or inherited disadvantages. That with enough determination and collaboration, any pack can become something better than what it was." Outside their window, the lights of their transformed territory twinkled like stars, each one representing a life that had been improved by their shared vision. It wasn't perfect, no society ever was, but it was theirs, built with their own hands and guided by principles they were willing to fight for. The foundations were laid. Now came the even more challenging work of building something worthy to stand on them. But looking at the pack they had created together, Kira had no doubt they were equal to the task. Chapter 16. The morning sun cast golden light across the training grounds where 2 years ago, Kira had first challenged Dominic in formal combat. Now the ancient stone circle had been expanded into a comprehensive fitness and education complex, its rings echoing with laughter instead of violence as pack children learned the difference between martial arts and mindless brutality. Kira stood at the center of the original ring, adjusting her stance to accommodate the subtle changes in her body that only she and Dominic knew about yet. At 4 months pregnant with twins, she was still months away from showing, but her wolf senses were already adapting to protect the precious lives growing within her. "Your balance is off," Dominic observed from where he was demonstrating defensive postures to a group of adolescent wolves. "You're favoring your left side." "I'm fine," she replied, flowing through a complex kata that would have been impossible for most wolves to execute. But even as she moved with fluid grace, she could feel the tiny lives responding to her motion with gentle flutters that made her heart swell with joy. Around them, the pack children practiced in mixed groups that would have been unthinkable under the old hierarchy. 7-year-old Sophie, daughter of former Alpha bloodline, worked patiently with Marcus Jr., whose Omega parents had once been invisible servants. The children saw no difference in each other's worth, exactly as Kira and Dominic had dreamed. "Alpha Queen," called out Isabella, a spirited 10-year-old whose parents were both former underground fighters, now working as pack security. "Can you show us that spinning kick from last week?" Kira smiled but shook her head. "Not today, little warrior. But I'll teach you something even better. How to read your opponent's intentions before they move." As she began explaining the subtle art of predicting attacks through body language, Dominic watched with the quiet satisfaction of a male whose mate was exactly where she belonged. The transformation from the shadow to Alpha Queen to beloved teacher was complete, and Kira had never looked more radiant. "Alpha King," Marcus Jr. piped up during a break. "My mama says you and Alpha Queen fought each other before you got mated. Is that true?" Dominic exchanged an amused glance with Kira. "It's true. Your Alpha Queen put me flat on my back right here in this ring." "Did it hurt?" Sophie asked with wide eyes. "My pride hurt more than my body," Dominic admitted, earning giggles from the children. "Why did you fight?" Isabella wanted to know. Kira knelt to the little girl's level, mindful of the precious cargo she carried. "Because we didn't understand each other yet. I thought he was just another bully who wanted to keep wolves like your parents powerless. He thought I was dangerous because of my past." "Were you dangerous?" Marcus Jr. asked with the fearless curiosity of youth. "Very dangerous," Kira said honestly. "But I learned that being dangerous and being destructive are different things. True warriors protect those who can't protect themselves." "Like you protect us?" Sophie asked. "Like all of us protect each other," Kira corrected gently. "That's what pack means." The lesson continued for another hour, with children rotating through different stations that taught everything from basic self-defense to conflict resolution. When the session ended, the young wolves scattered to their various afternoon activities, some to academic classes in the integrated school, others to apprenticeships with crafts wolves and professionals throughout the pack. As the training grounds emptied, Kira and Dominic found themselves alone for the first time all day. The silence was comfortable, filled with the satisfaction of watching their shared vision take root in the next generation. Dr. Chen confirmed it this morning, Kira said quietly, her hand unconsciously moving to her still flat stomach. Twins. Healthy and developing perfectly. Dominic's face lit up with joy that transformed his usually serious features. Twins. Our children will never know what it's like to live in a world where their worth is determined by their birth rank. They'll make their own way based on their choices and character, Kira agreed. Just like every other child in this pack. They began walking toward the pack house, their steps unconsciously synchronized after 2 years of partnership. The territory they passed through bore little resemblance to the rigid hierarchy they had inherited. Former underground fighters worked alongside traditional pack members in the gardens. Omega children played with alpha pups without a second thought. The community center buzzed with activities for wolves of all ages and interests. Letter for you, Timothy called out as they entered the main building. 2 years of confidence building had transformed him into an efficient administrator whose organizational skills were invaluable to pack operations. Kira accepted the envelope with surprise, recognizing the prison postmark. Inside was a single sheet of paper covered in Garrett's careful handwriting. Alpha Queen Kira and Alpha King Dominic. I heard through my prison counselor that the pack continues to thrive under your leadership. The rehabilitation programs you've established have helped many of the wolves I once failed to serve properly. I want you to know that I spend my days now counseling other inmates, trying to help them find the redemption that seemed impossible when I sat in their position. I also heard rumors of an addition to your family. If those rumors are true, please know that even from this cell, I wish you joy. Your children will grow up in a world better than the one I helped create, and that brings me peace. I will never be able to undo the harm I caused, but I can spend my remaining years ensuring that other wolves don't make my mistakes. Thank you for giving me the chance to try. Respectfully, Garrett Blackwood. Kira read the letter twice, then handed it to Dominic. The transformation in Garrett's correspondence over the past 2 years had been remarkable, from bitter defiance to genuine remorse to this quiet dedication to helping others. Do you think he means it? Dominic asked after reading. I think people can change if they truly want to, Kira replied. We've seen it happen with the former fighters, with wolves who grew up believing in rigid hierarchies, even with ourselves. Should we respond? Kira considered the question. When the twins are born, we'll send a photo. Not as forgiveness for what he did, but as proof that life moves forward and good can come from even the darkest situations. That evening, they called a special pack meeting to share their news. The great hall filled with excited chatter as wolves of all ranks gathered to hear what their leaders had to announce. 2 years ago, Dominic began, we asked you to trust us with a vision of what this pack could become. You've worked alongside us to build something unprecedented, a community where every wolf has value and every voice matters. Tonight, Kira continued, we want to share news that represents the future of everything we've built together. She placed her hand on her stomach, the gesture small but unmistakable. Dominic and I are expecting twins. The hall erupted in celebration. Cheers, howls of joy, and congratulations filled the air as pack members embraced each other and their leaders. Children squealed with excitement at the prospect of new playmates, while adults beamed with pride at this symbol of their leader's commitment to the pack's future. These children, Kira said when the noise finally died down, will be raised as full members of this pack community. They won't have special privileges because of who their parents are. They'll earn their place through their own efforts and character, just like every other wolf here. But they will have one advantage, Dominic added with a smile. They'll grow up in a world where their potential isn't limited by artificial boundaries, where they can become teachers or fighters, healers or leaders, based on their passions and talents rather than their bloodline. The celebration continued long into the night, with pack members sharing stories and dreams for the future. Former underground fighters talked about the children they hoped to have now that they could offer them stable, healthy lives. Traditional pack families spoke about the opportunities their children would have in this new merit-based society. As the festivities wound down, Kira and Dominic returned to the training ring where their relationship had truly begun. The ancient stones were bathed in moonlight, creating an atmosphere of timeless peace. Think our cubs will be fighters? Dominic asked, watching as Kira adjusted her stance to accommodate her changing body. Kira's smile was radiant in the silver light. They'll be whatever they choose to be. But they'll know the difference between fighting for power and fighting for love. And if they choose to be warriors, then we'll teach them what we learned, that true strength protects the innocent, defends the helpless, and builds rather than destroys. She moved through a series of gentle exercises, her movements modified but still graceful. We'll teach them that violence should always be the last resort, never the first choice. Dominic joined her in the center of the ring, and together they moved through synchronized forms that spoke of partnership rather than competition. 2 years of training together had created a harmony of movement that was beautiful to watch. "I love you," he said quietly as their exercise concluded. "I love you too," she replied, stepping into his embrace. "And I love the world we've built for our children." Their kiss was soft and full of promise, a celebration of everything they had overcome and everything still to come. But it was interrupted by a chorus of young voices calling from the edge of the training ground. "Alpha Queen! Alpha Queen!" They broke apart to see a group of pack children who had apparently escaped their bedtime routines, led by the irrepressible Isabella. "Can you teach us that balance exercise you showed us yesterday?" Isabella called out. "Mama said we could practice for a few more minutes before bed." Kira laughed, the sound pure joy echoing off the ancient stones. "All right, little warriors. One more lesson before sleep." As she began demonstrating the exercise, modified now for both her condition and her young students, Dominic watched with deep contentment. This was their legacy. Not the destruction of enemies or the accumulation of power, but the patient work of teaching the next generation to be better than those who came before. The children clustered around their Alpha Queen, hanging on every word as she explained not just the physical mechanics of balance, but the mental discipline required to stay centered in the face of challenges. They were learning more than martial arts. They were learning life skills that would serve them regardless of what paths they chose. "Remember," Kira told them as the lesson concluded, "strength isn't about how hard you can hit. It's about how much you can protect, how much you can build, how much you can heal." "Yes, Alpha Queen," the children chorused before racing back toward the pack house and their waiting parents. Alone again under the stars, Kira and Dominic stood in the ring where they had once been enemies, now united in purpose and love. "Do you think we've succeeded?" Dominic asked, gesturing toward the peaceful territory around them. "Look around," Kira replied. "Former fighters are raising families in safety. Children play together without seeing barriers. Wolves who were once invisible now have voices in their own governance." She placed both hands on her stomach, where 2 new lives grew strong. "We've built something worth fighting for, worth protecting, worth passing on. And our children will build something even better. They will, because they'll start from a foundation of equality and opportunity that we had to fight to create." Kira's smile was radiant with certainty. "The shadow is truly dead now, Dominic. In her place stands someone I never thought I could be, a protector, a teacher, a mother. And an Alpha Queen who earned her crown through service rather than conquest." They kissed again under the eternal stars, surrounded by the peaceful sounds of their territory, settling into sleep. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to grow and improve. But tonight they had everything they needed: each other, their pack, and the promise of new life that would carry their legacy into the future. The foundation was laid. The building had begun. And the future they had dared to dream was becoming reality, one choice at a time, one life at a time, one generation at a time. The pack was home, and home was forever. Thank you for listening. Like, share, and subscribe for more.